Hello, Internet. I am Pastor Recoil, and welcome to my parish. Today is the 5th Sunday in Lent, and we're going to talk about it. Welcome to Pastor Recoil's parish, where I talk about some things that you may not have heard about in church, either because it's not quite appropriate for all audiences or it just isn't something that's easy to talk about in a sermon. Today's readings for the 5th Sunday in Lent are Ezekiel 37, 1 through 14, Psalm 130, Romans 8, 6 through 11, and John 11, 1 through 45. Today, we're going to talk about new life. All 4 of today's readings focus on the promise of new life in the face of death. Ezekiel sees a vision of worn bones which come together and form a vast living army. Psalm 130 calls out to God for rescue and redemption. John 11 tells the story of the 3 days dead Lazarus being raised again by Jesus. And Romans 8 records Paul talking about the new life for all followers of Jesus because of Jesus' death and resurrection. These readings all focus on this promise of God's action in hopeless situations. And it makes sense for these readings to be here, as we're just a week away from hearing again the story of Jesus' death and 2 weeks away from hearing again the story of his resurrection. The season of Lent is almost over and we're about to shift into the season of Easter, but we're not quite there yet. And we're in many ways preparing for a sort of ritualized uncertainty. We know that the Christian scriptures will record that Jesus will rise from the dead after his crucifixion. But during this season, we kind of pretend like we don't know that, at least as we're getting into these next few weeks. So this 5th Sunday in Lent leaves us with a last reminder of new life before we feel again the desolation and loss in Holy Week and with Jesus' death. During Holy Week, we reflect on that last week of Jesus' life and put ourselves in the place of Jesus' closest friends. They see him anger the secular and religious leaders. They see him say and do things that make him look like a rebel against Rome. And then they see one of their own betray Jesus, and they see the events of Jesus' arrest, trial, and death at the hands of Pontius Pilate. We'll experience all of these things too, but for now, the readings remind us of what comes after the seeming hopelessness of death. The passages from Ezekiel 37 and John 11 are each messages of hope in the midst of hopelessness. In the gospel, Jesus gets news that his friend Lazarus is near death. And then he waits around for 2 days and finally gets to the town where they live, and Lazarus is dead. Lazarus' sister Martha comes up to Jesus and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." They have a bit of a theological discussion where Martha misunderstands something that Jesus says in a very misunderstandable way. But in the end, Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die." And after some more things in the story, Jesus raises Lazarus to new life, even though he'd been dead for 3 days. Then in Ezekiel 37, Ezekiel has this vision of a valley full of dry bones. It is a hopeless scene of death. But God asks Ezekiel, "Can these bones live again?" And Ezekiel kind of goes, "Well, I wouldn't think so, but I'm guessing that you're going to tell me otherwise." And God does say to Ezekiel, "Prophesy to the bones that they will live, and then you will know that I am the Lord." These dry bones are dead, dead, dead. But when Ezekiel speaks God's words to them, they form a vast living army. And then God explains to Ezekiel that this vision is to give hope. God's people are dead, dried up, and without hope, but God will give them new life and raise them up again. We get these stories and the ones from our other passages today to remind us that even in the midst of hopelessness, there is indeed hope of new life. Liturgically, it's the promise of hope in the midst of the despair of Jesus' death. But it's also hope for us individually, that when everything seems like it's not going right and everyone seems against us, we can take comfort in knowing that it does get better. And even more, it's hope institutionally, that when churches or governments seem unhealthy and unsustainable and seem to cause more harm than good, there is also there the promise of new life. Not the same life that was, but something new and different that restores hope and life and joy. Just like the raising of dusty old bones in Ezekiel's vision, or the raising of stinky dead Lazarus in John's Gospel. So if you want to see more content like this, check out the links off to my right, or click the logo below my face to subscribe so you'll know when my next video comes out. Thank you for watching, and take the time this week to love your neighbor as yourself, especially if you don't like them all that much.